The invitation never came. That much was confirmed years later when the full diplomatic record was declassified and released to the public. The Galactic Cooperative of Sentient Species, a body that had existed for roughly 11,000 years by their own calendar, had debated humanity's admission for what translated roughly to 4 of our decades. The vote had been postponed. Repeatedly. Not out of malice, the record showed. Out of something far more unsettling, uncertainty. Humanity didn't fit any of the established categories. We weren't a refuge species fleeing extinction. We weren't a newly elevated civilization guided into spaceflight by a patron race. We hadn't been discovered, we'd arrived. And we hadn't arrived quietly. The first human vessel to achieve verified faster-than-light transit, the UNSS Meridian, a joint European East Asian research platform commissioned under the UN Space Development Charter, had not stumbled upon the edge of known cooperative space by accident. Dr. Yuna Chai, the mission's chief navigation officer, had later described the moment with typical understatement in her memoir. We knew something was out there. We aimed for the signal. We weren't wrong. What they found at the edge of the Orion Arm wasn't a patrol fleet or a beacon. It was a way station, a minor logistics hub maintained by a species called the Veth, who had been managing interstellar freight routes for roughly 3,000 years and had, by all accounts, never once encountered a species that had located their infrastructure before making formal contact. The Veth's initial response, translated later by a cooperation of 3 AI systems and 2 human linguists, was recorded as, "This vessel should not exist here. Who authorized your approach vector?" Commander Adiz Okonkwo's response, calm, measured and recorded for posterity, was, "No one. We authorized ourselves." That exchange took 6 weeks to reach the cooperative's central administrative body on Aurela Station. It took another 3 months for the full implications to be understood. Humanity had not been guided, had not been sponsored, had not been invited. We had, using only our own mathematics, our own physics and our own stubbornness, reverse-engineered faster-than-light transit from intercepted signal decay patterns, signals the cooperative had considered effectively invisible to pre-contact civilizations. The head of the cooperative's First Contact Directorate, a Theresi elder named Covenant of Seven Tides, reportedly reviewed the technical summary 3 times before responding. Her response, again translated, was recorded simply as, "Show me the math." Humanity's first day before the Galactic Council was not the triumphant arrival some had imagined. There was no grand fleet. No dramatic entrance. There was a single diplomatic shuttle, a delegation of 9 humans, and a waiting room that smelled faintly of ozone and something none of them could identify. Ambassador Kenji Murai adjusted his collar, checked his translation earpiece, and looked at the sealed chamber doors ahead. "They voted to delay our admission again this morning," his aide whispered. "Procedural objection. The Drenethi block." "I know," Murai said. "How do you want to handle it?" He was quiet for a moment. "We ask for the floor anyway." The procedural rules of the Galactic Cooperative were not arbitrary. 11,000 years of interstellar diplomacy had produced a system that was, by most measures, remarkably stable. Species rose, species fell, disputes were mediated, wars, when they happened, were eventually ended. The Council had seen it all. What it had not seen, in living memory of any species present, was a non-admitted observer delegation request speaking rights during an active session. The request itself was technically permitted under a clause so old that the cooperative's legal AI had to access tertiary archive databases to confirm it. The clause, Section 7, Subsection 14 of the Founding Compact, established during a border dispute between the Veth and a now-extinct species called the Murani, allowed for any intelligent voice present in the chamber to petition for temporary address, contingent on unanimous consent of recognized members. Unanimous consent. Of 412 recognized species. Ambassador Murai's aide had laughed when she'd first read the clause. "It's a dead letter," she said. "No one's ever actually invoked it." "Good," Murai had replied. "Then no one's practiced blocking it." The session had already been underway for 2 hours when the human delegation's formal petition was submitted via the Council's administrative channel. The presiding arbiter, a Theresi named Long Voice in Deep Water, paused mid-address, processed the petition, and then was silent for an unusually long moment. "The delegation from the unrecognized human territory of Sol System has submitted a petition for temporary floor address," she announced. "Unanimous consent is required. Objections?" The Drenethi ambassador, tall, deep violet and radiating visible displeasure, was on his feet immediately. "Objection sustained on grounds of precedent," he said. This species has no standing. The petition is procedurally valid, Long voice in deep water said calmly. I've confirmed it. The question is consent, not standing. Are there objections from recognized members? There were 14 of them. There were also, as it turned out, 401 species who said nothing. In the cooperative's rules, silence was not abstention. Silence, during a consent request, was considered agreement. The Drenithy ambassador stood very still. The petition, Long voice in deep water said after confirming the count twice, is granted. Ambassador Murai walked to the address platform with the particular kind of stillness that people mistake for calm but is actually something more deliberate. His translation earpiece was running 4 concurrent feeds. His notes were on a tablet he didn't look at once. He began speaking in standard cooperative lingua, imperfect, accented, but comprehensible, and only shifted to translated English when the nuance required it. He did not apologize for humanity's unannounced arrival. He did not ask for admission. He did not make promises about human peaceful intent or our desire to be good galactic citizens. Instead, he laid out, in 18 minutes, a precise accounting of what humanity had observed in the 12 months since Meridian's first contact. He described the Drenithy mining operations in the Threshold Corridor, operations occurring in a region the cooperative's own charter designated as protected space. He presented spectral analysis, transit logs and mass extraction data, cross-referenced against the cooperative's own public resource database. Then he said, "We don't yet have a seat at this table. But we have eyes. And we thought you should know what we've seen." 3 delegations walked out, the Drenithy among them. The chamber was otherwise very quiet. Long voice in deep water looked at the data on her screen for a long moment. "The human delegation," she said slowly, "will be offered provisional observer status pending full review. This session is recessed." The Drenithy had been members of the Galactic Cooperative for 6,000 years. That context matters. In 6,000 years they had absorbed 4 smaller civilizations through economic pressure, outlasted 2 that might have challenged them militarily, and cultivated a reputation as the cooperative's most skilled diplomatic operators. They did not achieve this through aggression. They achieved it through patience, leverage, and an extremely refined understanding of when a new arrival could be made to feel unwelcome enough to become compliant. They had done it before. They assumed, do it again. The pressure campaign against humanity's provisional observer status began within 72 hours of Murai's address. It was subtle at first: procedural delays on resource access requests, quiet conversations with allied species about the instability of unsponsored civilizations, a coordinated series of motions that would, if passed, effectively limit human vessels to a single designated transit corridor for the next 30 years. What the Drenithy had not factored into their model was a particular feature of human political psychology that even our closest allies have sometimes found difficult to predict. We respond to pressure by getting quieter. And when humans get quieter, they're usually thinking. Commander Adiz Okonkwo had not gone home after Meridian's return. She'd been folded into the newly formed UN Interstellar Affairs Command as Director of First Contact Operations, a title that hadn't existed 3 years earlier and came with a staff of 47 people working out of a converted research facility in Nairobi. She was the one who'd flagged the Drenithy's transit corridor proposal for what it was. "It's not about the corridor," she told the UN Security Council in a session that remained classified for 6 years. "The corridor is the visible move. The real objective is establishing that our access to interstellar space is something that can be limited, that we operate at the cooperative's discretion. If we accept this, every negotiation we have for the next century starts from that premise." "So we reject it," said the French representative. "We don't reject it," Okonkwo said. "We make it irrelevant." What happened next is sometimes called the quiet expansion in historical literature, though that name undersells it considerably. Over 14 months, while Murai's team engaged the cooperative in what appeared to be routine observer status proceedings, Earth's interstellar program, operating under a dramatically accelerated mandate, established 11 relay stations across a transit network that didn't use any corridor the Drenithy proposal would have controlled. The engineering involved was extraordinary. Not because the technology was impossible, the physics had been sound for years, but because of the sheer coordination required. 17 nations for private aerospace consortiums, and a workforce of approximately 340,000 people, all operating under a classified mandate that held for the entire duration. When the Drenithy Transit Corridor proposal finally came to a vote, humanity's delegate, not Murai this time, but a soft-spoken Kenyan physicist named Dr. Amara Sidi, who had joined the delegation as a technical advisor, stood and calmly noted that the resolution as written would restrict access to transit routes that human vessels no longer needed. She then submitted, as supporting documentation, the full network map. The Drenithy ambassador stared at it for a long time. "This was built," he said finally, "while we were in session." "Yes," Dr. Seedy said. "How?" She smiled very slightly. "We're good at building things under pressure. It's a long story. Most of it involves necessity." The transit corridor proposal was withdrawn the following day. It was the first time in recorded cooperative history that a Drenithy initiative had been withdrawn before a vote. In the debrief afterward, one of Murai's aides asked Okonkwo how she'd known the relay network gambit would work. She was quiet for a moment. "I didn't," she said. "But I knew that if we asked permission for everything, we'd spend the next century asking. We needed them to understand that humanity doesn't wait for corridors to be opened. We find another way around. There is a species in the Galactic Cooperative called the Ardini. Most cooperative members know very little about them. This is not an accident. The Ardini have been spacefaring for approximately 40,000 years, longer than any other currently recognized species, and in that time they have developed what might be described as a philosophical preference for witnessing over participating. They maintain one seat on the council, they speak rarely, they vote rarely, and when they do either, the chamber tends to go quiet in a way that suggests everyone else finds it significant. They had watched humanity's first session and the fallout with the Drenithy, and the revelation of the relay network in complete silence. 12 days after the transit corridor withdrawal, a single encrypted communication arrived at the UN Interstellar Affairs Command Facility in Nairobi. It was addressed specifically to Commander Okonkwo. It was from the Ardini. The contents of that message remained classified for 9 years. When they were finally released, partly due to a declassification review, partly because Okonkwo herself felt the record deserved to be complete, they were surprisingly brief. The message, translated from Ardini notation by a system that required 6 months of linguistic calibration to even partially decode, read as follows. "We have watched 47 species make their first approach to this body. Most arrived asking for protection or resources or recognition. 3 arrived asking for nothing. Of those 3, 2 no longer exist. The 3rd built something that lasted. We do not give counsel, but we observe patterns. And we find your pattern interesting. Be careful that interesting does not become threatening. There is a difference, and the distance between them is shorter than most species realize." That was all. Okonkwo had read it 4 times before calling Murai. "What do you think it means?" he asked. "I think," she said carefully, "that someone very old just told us we're doing something right, and warned us not to overdo it. That's a very human way to summarize it." "I know. I think that's also the point." The Ardini message reframed something that had been developing inside the UN's interstellar strategy team for months, a question that nobody had quite wanted to state directly. Humanity had arrived at the cooperative as an unknown quantity. That was initially a vulnerability. But it was also, increasingly, something else: leverage. We had no debts, no old alliances to honor, no history of conflicts with any recognized species. Every member of the cooperative had centuries of entanglements with every other member. Humanity had none. We were, in diplomatic terms, completely unconstrained. The question was what to do with that. The answer that emerged, slowly, through argument, through failed drafts, through the kind of bureaucratic friction that produces occasionally something genuinely good, was a policy framework called the Meridian Doctrine, named for the ship that started all of this. Its core principle was simple enough to fit on one page. Humanity will not seek to join the existing order. Humanity will seek to improve it. Not through force. Not through posturing. Through presence, through information, through the willingness to say things in that chamber that species with more history and more to lose found it difficult to say. It was Murai who first articulated what that actually meant in practice, during an internal briefing that was later archived as one of the foundational documents of human interstellar policy. "We are the youngest species in that room," he said. "We have the least to lose from honesty. Every other delegation is managing a relationship with every other delegation. We are managing nothing yet. That means we can ask the questions nobody else will ask. We can name the problems nobody else will name. Not because we're braver. Because we haven't yet accumulated the debt that makes honesty expensive." Someone asked, "How long does that window last?" Murai considered it. "Long enough," he said. "If we use it well." Provisional observer status carried no voting rights. This was not an oversight. The cooperative's charter was explicit. Unrecognized or provisional members could attend sessions, submit documentation, and request floor time under the Section 7 clause humanity had already invoked. They could not, under any circumstances, participate in binding votes, which made what happened in Session 7441 of the Galactic Council technically impossible. And yet, the matter before the Council that day concerned a species called the Hishari, small, semi-aquatic, recently spacefaring, inhabitants of a binary star system roughly 40 light-years from cooperative core territory. The Hishari had applied for full membership 18 months prior. Their application had been stalled, not rejected, stalled, by a coalition of 4 mid-tier species who had territorial and resource interests in the Hishari's home system. The stall wasn't unusual. It was, in fact, a common mechanism. By keeping a species in application limbo, the blocking coalition could negotiate extraction agreements, transit rights, and various other concessions before membership was granted, meaning before the cooperative's full legal protections applied. It was legal. Barely. And everyone in that chamber knew what it was. Humanity had been watching the Hishari case for 7 months. What Ambassador Murai did was not cast a vote. Observers couldn't cast votes. What he did was submit, at the precise moment the vote was called, a formal point of charter interpretation, a mechanism that existed to pause a vote when a member believed a procedural issue had not been resolved. His point, that the blocking coalition's stated grounds for delay contained language that, under Charter Article 19, constituted conditional obstruction of membership access, which was technically prohibited. He had 3 legal scholars, 2 AI interpretation systems, and 6 months of case research behind him. The vote paused. The arbiter reviewed the point. The chamber was very still. After 40 minutes, Long Voice in Deepwater, who had, by this point, developed what might be described as a complicated professional relationship with the human delegation, ruled that the point had merit and required adjudication before the vote could proceed. The blocking coalition's legal teams requested a delay. The delay was granted, 48 hours. In those 48 hours, the Hishari application was leaked, in full, including the private correspondence of the blocking coalition, to 14 independent cooperative news networks simultaneously. The source was never officially identified. The correspondence made clear, in the coalition's own words, exactly what the stall was for. The vote, when it finally happened, was 389 in favor of Hishari membership, 11 opposed and 12 abstaining. The Hishari delegate, small, translucent, visibly overwhelmed by the proceedings, stood when the result was announced and said something in their own language that the translation systems rendered as, simply, "We did not expect this." Murai in the gallery said nothing. He didn't need to. The fallout was significant. 3 members of the blocking coalition filed formal complaints against the human delegation, alleging interference in cooperative proceedings. 2 of those complaints cited the information leak, though without proving human involvement, there was little that could be done. The 3rd complaint alleged that the charter interpretation point had been filed in bad faith. That complaint triggered a full review of humanity's observer status. It was, for 6 weeks, genuinely uncertain whether humans would be permitted to remain in the chamber at all. What saved it, and this is the part of the story that the historical record tends to underemphasize, was not human legal argument or diplomatic maneuvering. It was the Ardini. For the first time in 11 years, the Ardini delegate spoke during open session. She said 9 sentences. The transcript has been analyzed extensively. The core of it was this. This body exists to protect the interests of sentient life. A member who uses the tools of this body to protect sentient life has not violated the spirit of this chamber. Those who would remove that member should examine carefully whether their objection is procedural or personal. The review was closed without action 3 days later. Murai sent a brief message to Okonkwo that evening. The Ardini spoke. Her reply came 4 minutes later. I know. Don't waste it. Let us be precise about what humanity was, militarily, at this point in the story. We were not a superpower. We had a fleet, the UN Interstellar Defense Force, commissioned 4 years after Meridian's return, of approximately 60 vessels, ranging from frigate-class patrol ships to 3 larger, destroyer-equivalent platforms still running final system trials. We had functional energy shielding, directed energy weapons, and kinetic delivery systems that were, by most assessments, roughly competitive with cooperative mid-tier military technology. In a straight conflict with any of the cooperative's major defense powers, we would have lost. This was not pessimism, it was arithmetic. What humanity had that was genuinely different was not firepower. It was something the cooperative, in 11,000 years, had never quite systematized. We called it flexible response doctrine. The cooperative's translators, after some struggle, rendered it as something closer to adaptive unpredictability, which, accidentally, was far more accurate. The context that brought this to relevance was a conflict called the Threshold Incident. The Threshold Corridor, the same region where Drenithy mining operations had first been documented by Meridian, had, over the 2 years since Murai's initial address, become a flashpoint. The Drenithy had partially withdrawn their extraction operations under cooperative pressure, but a secondary species, the Keth separatist faction, a breakaway group not formally recognized by the cooperative, had moved into the vacuum. The Keth separatists were not sophisticated. They were desperate, which made them considerably more dangerous. They had armed approximately 40 vessels with salvaged military technology, and they had begun interdicting freight traffic along 3 established transit routes. 11 cooperative vessels had been damaged. 2 Veth freighters had been destroyed with their crews. The cooperative's response options were limited by a problem that was essentially political. Any large-scale military action in the Threshold Corridor would require authorization from multiple competing member species, each of whom had different interests in the region's eventual settlement. The authorization process was estimated to take 6 to 8 months. During those 6 to 8 months, the Keth would continue. It was the Veth who approached humanity first. The Veth ambassador, an old relationship, going back to Meridian's original first contact, met with Okonkwo through a back channel that was technically a violation of at least 3 cooperative diplomatic protocols. The meeting was brief. "We cannot wait 8 months, the Veth ambassador said. "I know," Okonkwo said. "The human fleet is small." "It is. But you are not constrained by the same authorization requirements. As an observer species, your fleet operations in unclaimed space are not subject to cooperative military council approval." Okonkwo looked at him for a long moment. "You've read our charter carefully," she said. "We have had good reason to," the ambassador replied. What followed was not, officially, a cooperative military operation. It was a navigational safety and transit security exercise, conducted by the UN Interstellar Defense Force in the Threshold Corridor, which happened to involve the deployment of 22 vessels in a pattern that effectively made Keth separatist interdiction operations unviable. The UNIF didn't engage in direct combat. Commander Yasmin Khalil, who led the deployment, had standing orders that were almost counterintuitive in their restraint: presence, not engagement. Human vessels moved into patrol configurations that closed off viable ambush corridors, broadcast open communication channels that made Keth coordination detectable, and maintained sensor grids that gave freight traffic 30-minute advance warning of any vessel approach. The Keth interdicted 3 more freighters in the first week. Then 2. Then none. Without engaging a single hostile vessel. It took 11 weeks. When it was over, transit through the corridor had returned to baseline, and the Keth separatist fleet had dispersed, partly from lack of viable targets, partly because 3 of their commanders had, apparently, received private communications making clear that the political situation was shifting and their moment had passed. Those communications were never officially attributed. In the Cooperative Council's closed session reviewing the Threshold Incident, a delegate from a species called the Merenthi said something that entered the diplomatic record and has been quoted many times since. "The humans resolved a situation that we had been unable to act on for 7 months. They did it with a fraction of the force that any of us would have considered deploying, and they did it without creating any new political debts or territorial complications. I am not certain whether to be relieved or unsettled." Long voice in deep water, presiding, said nothing for a moment. Then, perhaps both. The vote on full human membership into the Galactic Cooperative was scheduled for the 14th session of the Cooperative's annual administrative cycle, a date that had been formally set, postponed, reset, and very nearly postponed again over the course of 3 years. By the morning of the vote, Ambassador Murai had been in cooperative space for 4 years, 3 months and 11 days. He had lost 12 kilograms. He had learned to read Theresi body language well enough to know, 2 minutes into a conversation, whether it was going well. He had attended, by his own count, 641 formal sessions, submitted 218 formal documentation packages, and filed 37 charter interpretation points, of which 22 had been upheld. He had made something that could cautiously be called friends, and something that could more confidently be called respected adversaries. He had also, sometime in the 2nd year, stopped thinking of the chamber as foreign. The membership vote required a 2/3 majority of recognized members. There were 412 recognized members. 275 votes were required. The delegations that had declared their opposition, publicly, numbered 41. The delegations that had declared support numbered 187. The remaining 184 had said nothing. In the cooperative's voting tradition, silence during open session was not agreement. During formal votes, each delegation cast an explicit position. The silent bloc would have to choose. Okonkwo, watching the session via live relay from Nairobi, had run the model 17 times. The range of outcomes was wide. "We don't know," she told the Security Council the morning of. "We won't know until they vote." "What's your gut?" the Secretary General asked. She was quiet for a moment. "My gut says it doesn't matter," she said. "Not the way you're thinking. If we get in today, we work from the inside. If we don't get in today, we spend another year as observers and we keep doing what we've been doing. Either way, the work continues." "That's very calm of you." "I've had 4 years to practice," she said. The session opened. The arbiter, long voice in deep water, who had, by this point, presided over more human-related proceedings than any other cooperative official in history, called the membership vote into formal order. Before the vote itself, by established tradition, the candidate species was permitted a final address. Murai stood. He had written 7 drafts of this address. He did not use any of them. He spoke for 9 minutes. He did not describe humanity's achievements. He did not list our capabilities. He did not make promises about what kind of member we would be. What he did, instead, was describe what he had seen in 4 years in that chamber. He described the Hishari delegate's face when the membership vote passed. He described the Veth ambassador who had come to humanity for help because the existing system had no mechanism fast enough. He described the Ardini elders' 9 sentences, and what they had meant to him. He said, "We arrived here unannounced and, I think, somewhat inconvenient. We have been, I am told, unusual in our methods. I can only say that we brought what we had: curiosity, stubbornness, and an earnest belief that the rules of a body like this one should mean something. We are not applying for membership because we need protection or resources or recognition. We are applying because we think we have something to contribute to a conversation that, by your own evidence, is not finished. We are young. We will make mistakes. But we have been paying attention. And we are ready to sit at the table as equals, not because we demand it, but because we believe it is where the useful work happens." He sat down. The chamber was quiet. Then Long Voice in Deep Water called the vote. The final count took 11 minutes to process across all 412 member delegations. In favor, 341. Opposed, 38. Abstaining, 33. The threshold was 275. Humanity had cleared it by 66 votes. There was no applause. The cooperative didn't have a tradition of it. But there was a sound that the human delegation's recording systems captured and that linguists later identified as the Theresi equivalent of a collective exhale. A release of held breath. Long Voice in Deep Water waited for the chamber to settle. "The Sol system and its recognized governing authority, the United Nations of Earth," she said, "is hereby admitted as a full member of the Galactic Cooperative of Sentient Species." She paused. "Welcome," she said, "to the table." Murai sent a single message to Okonkwo when the session ended. It passed. Her reply came in 40 seconds. "I know. I'm watching. Don't celebrate too long. There's work to do." He smiled. "There always is." In the years that followed, humanity's membership would be tested, strained, and occasionally celebrated. We would make the mistakes Murai had promised. We would also, on more occasions than our critics expected, make the difference that he had quietly implied. The Galactic Cooperative was not transformed by humanity's arrival. It was perhaps nudged, adjusted, incrementally, in the direction of something slightly better than what it had been. That is, in the end, how most things worth keeping are built. Not through a single dramatic moment. Through 10,000 small ones. Meridian had aimed for a signal and found a civilization. What happened next was just humanity, doing what humanity does. Showing up. Paying attention. Refusing to wait for a corridor to be opened. And, when the moment came, speaking.